Snow crunches under worn boots. The wind moves in quiet sighs across the frostbitten road. A thermos rattles in his truck's glove box like a memory trying to break loose. In the back seat, beneath a worn quilt, a small girl sleeps. Her mittened hand still clutches a crayon, its paper peeling at the edges. And then through the fog, just beyond the bend in the trees, he sees her, a woman in a wedding dress, tattered and trembling, chained to a tree, still, as if she's part of the forest. As if she's waiting to be remembered. His name was Clay. He didn't say much anymore. Not unless he had to. His words used to come freely. Stories at the dinner table. Lullabies hummed into the crook of his wife's neck. Jokes whispered into his daughter's ear when the power went out and the world was lit only by candles and breath. But 2 winters ago, the silence moved in. When Ellie died, pneumonia, they said. But Clay knew better. It was cold that killed her, the kind of cold that seeps into the soul before it ever reaches the skin. They'd kept the fire going, but the logs had run low. He'd chopped late into the night, back blistered, hands raw, still not enough. He was asleep when she slipped away. Junie had curled against her mama's chest for warmth and woke up to stillness. Clay had been carrying that moment like a second skin ever since. Now he worked when he could. Odd jobs, hauling junk, clearing snow, chopping wood for neighbors. Who'd lost strength but still remembered warmth. It didn't pay much, but it kept the house warm enough for Junie. She was 6 now, wise in ways no 6-year-old should be. She missed her mama in the quietest ways, pressing her face to the window when snow began to fall, folding napkins the way Ellie used to, asking questions Clay didn't know how to answer. There was a ritual between them. Every Sunday night, just before bed, Clay would read Ellie's last letter. She'd written it when she'd gotten sick when she knew the wind would win. Junie, it began. The world is cold sometimes, but you, my love, are the warmth I leave behind. Clay never made it to the end without swallowing hard. Junie never interrupted. She just leaned into him, her heartbeat soft and steady as snowfall. That letter lived in the top drawer beside their bed. Clay never opened that drawer for anything else. It was on a Wednesday afternoon, the kind that forgets to turn the lights on, that Clay found her. He was taking the long way home. The ridge road ran behind the woods, faster but unpaved and often forgotten. Most folks avoided it when frost kissed the earth, but Clay liked the silence there, the way the trees stood like old watchers, the way you could almost hear the past breathing between the trunks. Junie was asleep in the back, cheeks pink, boots dangling off the seat. A half-eaten sandwich rested in her lap. Clay's thermos was empty, but he shook it anyway. Habit. Maybe. Hope. He spotted her just past the bend. At first he thought she was part of the trees. White dress torn at the hem, hair matted with frost, face pale as moonlight. Still. A statue in the woods. A bride left behind. Clay pulled the truck to the shoulder. The tires crunched over gravel and old leaves. He stepped out into the cold and walked toward her slowly. There was no movement. Then, a flicker of breath. Lips parted barely. Her voice, dry and small as wind through pine needles. Don't take me back. He stopped. Up close, the dress was stained. Mud, blood, time. She was barefoot. An old rusted chain was clamped around her ankle, its length nailed into the thick base of the tree. Her fingers were blue at the tips. Her eyes never fully opened. "Ma'am?" he whispered, but she had drifted back into something deeper than sleep. Clay crouched, touched the chain. It was wedged deep into the bark, like it had been there longer than she had. He looked around. No tracks but his own. A wedding dress in the woods, a woman who wanted to stay lost, and a chain holding her in place. He stood, took a slow breath, and looked back at the truck. Junie had stirred. Her face was pressed to the fogged window, watching. He gave her a small wave. She blinked, sleep-heavy, and nodded. Clay turned back to the woman. "I won't take you back," he said softly. I'm going to get you out of here." The chain was colder than the wind. It groaned when he pried it free. The metal had been hammered into the wood with a cruelty that didn't rush. Whoever did it wanted her to stay. She didn't protest when he lifted her, didn't flinch, just exhaled, one soft sound, like relief and surrender braided together. She weighed little more than Junie, bones and story. He wrapped his coat around her and carried her through the snow. When he opened the truck door, Junie was sitting up. Her mittened hands were folded in her lap. She looked at the woman, then at Clay, and said quietly, "Is she our angel, Daddy?" Clay didn't answer right. "Way." He adjusted the woman in his arms, settled her carefully into the front seat, and buckled the belt across her waist. She didn't stir. Snowflakes were falling harder now, soft like ash or grace. He closed the door gently, climbed behind the wheel, and as he started the engine, Junie leaned forward from the back and rested her chin on his shoulder. "She looks like one," she whispered. Clay nodded. His eyes stayed on the road ahead, but inside something long frozen had begun to thaw. Not fast, not fully, just a flicker, a breath. The house breathed with quiet. It had always done so, settling into the rhythm of creaking floors and the soft, patient crackle of a wood-burning stove. Clay didn't fill it with music or noise. After Ellie died, it seemed wrong to compete with the silence she left behind. It was a small place, weather-beaten on the outside, but tidy in the way that only grief could maintain. Routines etched into habit, not joy. The living room smelled of pine logs and wax from the old lantern on the shelf. A photograph of Ellie, grainy and soft-edged, leaned beside it. Junie's room was the warmest. Clay made sure of that. Every night, he tucked extra blankets under. Her mattress lined the windowsill with rolled towels to block the draft. Her tiny bed was painted yellow, fading now, but still glowing faintly like captured sunlight. That's where the woman woke. The firelight flickered low, casting long, slow shadows that danced across the walls. She didn't sit up right away. Her eyes drifted from ceiling to window to the crayon drawing taped beside the nightstand, lines and swirls of color that barely resembled her, except for the white dress and the wings. Junie had drawn her as a fairy. The girl had worked for hours, in quiet, tongue poking from the corner of her mouth, determined to make it perfect. Clay had found her that first night, curled at the table with her markers and crayons, whispering to herself, "She looks like magic, but tired magic." The woman hadn't spoken since that whisper in the woods. Not a word, just breaths and blinks and the slow return of color to her cheeks. The first morning, Junie brought her a cup of tea in the same chipped mug Ellie used to use on snow days. Clay watched from the hallway as the woman accepted it with trembling hands. She didn't drink it at first, just held it, letting the warmth seep into her palms like memory. On the second morning, Clay left a wool scarf folded beside her bed. It was Ellie's, too, red with faded gold stitching near the edges. The woman touched it gently, as if it might crumble. Then she wrapped it around her shoulders and kept it there. Still, she said nothing. She moved slowly through the house, barefoot, most of the time, but steady. She began folding laundry without being asked. Junie's socks, Clay's flannels, towels fresh from the line that still smelled like winter wind. She never intruded. She only existed just enough to be noticed when she wasn't there. A presence, like snow, quiet, constant, heavy without asking to be. Clay didn't press. Questions itched at the back of his mind, but they never made it to his mouth. He was a man who knew how to wait. It was on the fourth morning, while frost traced delicate maps across the windows, that she spoke. She stood in the kitchen, staring out at the brittle sky, steam rising from the kettle behind her. "Lena," she said. The word was soft, like it surprised her. "My name is Lena." Clay didn't turn from the wood pile he was stacking near the stove. He just gave a small nod and said, "All right, nothing else, that was enough." Later that day, she asked if she could help with the firewood. He handed her gloves without a word. They worked in tandem, Clay splitting, Lena stacking. Snowflakes floated down around them, dissolving on their sleeves. When she bent to pick up a fallen log, Something slipped from her coat pocket, a torn piece of paper, scorched at the edges. Clay caught a glimpse of script before she quickly tucked. "Dibak?" He didn't ask. She didn't explain. That night, after Junie's bath, Lena sat on the edge of the girl's bed and ran a brush through her tangled curls. Junie leaned into her touch like a kitten, eyes half-lidded with trust. Then Lena began to hum. The tune was low, slow, filled with something ancient and soft. Junie sighed, eyes fluttering closed. Clay, pausing outside the door, listened. He stood in the dim hallway, heart caught in his throat. That lullaby. He hadn't heard it since Ellie sang it the week before she died. The memory hit him like a warm ache, gentle but unbearable. He stepped into the doorway. Lena looked up, her hands still in Junie's hair. She didn't stop humming. Clay crossed the room, quiet as falling ash. He draped the red scarf around her shoulders without a word. She looked at him just for a moment. Something like gratitude flickered in her eyes, but deeper. Recognition, maybe, of pain, of endurance. Then he turned and walked out. Behind him, the lullaby continued, gentle, healing. For a house with too much silence, it was the smallest miracle. Morning settled into a rhythm soft enough to be mistaken for peace. The cold didn't bite quite as hard now. It still gathered at the windows and laced its breath across the glass. But inside, the house held warmth like a promise. Lena made porridge every morning. She stirred it slow and methodical, the way someone does when they want to keep their hands busy more than feed a hunger. She always added a pinch of cinnamon. Junie liked it that way. Clay hadn't bought cinnamon in 2 years. Junie used to call it the smell of hugs, and after Ellie passed, he just couldn't bear the scent. But now, there it was again, curling into the air while the fire crackled low and the kettle hissed its steady lullaby. Clay fixed the cabinet, door she kept struggling with, the one above the sink that squeaked and swung too low. She'd bump into it each time, mutter something under her breath and reach up too quickly, wincing. He didn't ask what the wince meant, just waited until she went outside with Junie one afternoon and sanded the hinge, smoothed the wood, lined the latch. That evening she opened it and blinked when it didn't shriek or sag. She turned to Clay. He only said, "Figured it had done enough complaining." Lena smiled. It was a small thing, but it stayed. Out in the yard, Junie made 3 snowmen. One was tall with a scarf that used to belong to Ellie, red with one missing tassel. "That's Mom," she said, patting the lumpily packed arms. The second was shorter, with button eyes and a hat pulled low. "That's me." The third was the smallest, dressed in Lena's borrowed mittens. "That's the new Mom," Junie said without looking up. Lena froze, mid-step. Clay said nothing. He watched from the porch with a mug half full of cooling coffee. Later, Lena collected her mittens from the melting figure. She held them close to her chest for a moment before going back inside. Sometimes she wrote letters, not often, and never openly. Clay only noticed because paper didn't burn evenly in the stove when you crumpled it too quickly. Once, she left one on the table, face down, sealed only by a fold. Clay didn't touch it, but when he returned from chopping wood, it was gone. That night, a sheriff's car passed by the road, slow, deliberate, as if looking for something, or someone. Clay saw Lena watching from the window, pale again, lips tight. She flinched when the headlights lit up the living room for a moment too long. Clay added another log to the fire. The scent of cedar bloomed in the air. He handed her a mug of tea and didn't say anything. Lena sat down beside him, her eyes flickering but her hands steady. The next morning, Clay was marking Junie's height on the kitchen door frame, just like he had every few months. Little pencil lines. Tiny. Dates. A slow climb of growth beside the doorway. Junie giggled when he stood her up straight. Then, without thinking, Lena stepped beside the frame and bent her knees just enough to match Junie's height. She made a mark, not in pencil, but with the corner of her thumbnail. She laughed. It was small and breathy, almost embarrassed. "Sorry," she said. "Didn't mean to." Clay looked at the mark, then at her. "You're here now," he said, and that was it. Later, Junie padded over to Diwa. Lena holding a small box, an old jewelry case Clay had almost forgotten. It held a few keepsakes that once belonged to Ellie. Junie opened it and pulled out a silver pin shaped like a tiny bird. "This was Mommy's favorite," she said, carefully placing it in Lena's hand. "She'd like you too." Lena stared at the pin like it might vanish. Then her fingers curled around it and something in her face cracked, gracefully, like melting snow pulling away from the edge of a roof. She looked down. A tear dropped to the floor, then another. Junie rapped, her arms around her waist. Lena held her tightly, breathing shakily into her hair. Clay saw from the stairs. He didn't say anything, just pulled one of his old flannels from the closet and laid it across the banister, folded neat. By the time he returned to the living room, Lena had pinned the bird to her sweater. It shimmered faintly in the firelight, and, for the first time since she'd come, the silence between them felt full, like something planted rather than left behind. The wind arrived first, low and mean, crawling under the porch steps and howling down the chimney like a lost voice. By late afternoon, snow had started to fall with an urgent rhythm, wet and heavy, blanketing the yard in silence. Clay went out, twice to split more wood, his coat stiff with frost, gloves soaked through. Each time he returned, Lena had the kettle boiling, the rugs pulled closer to the stove, and Junie wrapped in another blanket. The third time, he didn't go back out. By evening, the windows were fogged with breath and cold pressed in against. The walls like a reminder. Out there things waited, but in here there was firelight. And them. They ate quietly. Stew thick with lentils and potatoes. And by the time the blizzard settled in fully, the power flickered and went out. No one panicked. Clay lit the oil lamp. Lena stirred the coals. Junie, already heavy-lidded, curled into the corner of the couch with her head in Lena's lap. The fire painted orange ribbons across the room, shadows of wood and wool and skin soft enough to hold the weight of things left unsaid. Clay watched them from the rocking chair. Creaked softly beneath him as the wind screamed and moaned through the pines beyond the walls. "She always loved the snow," he said, his voice low, raw in the quiet. Lena looked down at Junie, who murmured something in her sleep, then settled, deeper into her warmth. After a long pause, Lena said, "I didn't." Clay looked up. She wasn't staring at him, but at the flames, and her voice was low, matter-of-fact and far away. "I was supposed to marry someone. A man from another town. I never met him, not properly, it was arranged. Everyone smiled like it was normal, like it was good. My mother cried, but she told me it was the only way. The night before the wedding I ran, just took my boots and coat. I didn't even bring food." Junie shifted, and Lena adjusted her gently. "They found me. A cousin, or maybe an uncle. I don't remember anymore. They chained me to the tree to teach me a lesson, said if I wanted to run so badly I could sit with the woods for a while. Someone was supposed to come back, but no one did." Her fingers stroked Junie's hair. "I thought I'd die there. It was what I wanted, I think. No one to wait for. No one who'd notice if I didn't come back." Clay leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. The fire cracked. Then, she didn't finish. He didn't need her to. "I'm not afraid anymore," she said after a while. "But I'm not sure what I am." Clay stood and added another log to the fire. The flames reached higher, bright and yellow. "Don't need. To be sure tonight," he said. She nodded once, and for a long time they sat like that, Junie breathing softly, the storm clawing at the roof, the fire burning steady between them like a held breath. Later, after Junie had been carried to bed and the fire banked low, Clay opened a drawer he hadn't touched in months. It was the same drawer he'd emptied the morning Ellie died, where he'd stored her letters, her photos, her ring. The gold band still lay in the velvet box, tarnished now, quiet. He looked at it a long time. His thumb traced the edge but didn't lift it. Instead, he set the box aside and pulled out a blank page from the old notepad nearby. He placed it gently on the table and uncapped a pen beside it. "For whatever you want to write next," he said, voice barely louder than the ticking stove. Lena looked at the page, then up at him. He didn't wait for her to speak. The snow muffled everything outside. No cars. No boots, no reasons to move fast. She sat down at the table as Clay went to the window, watching the white drifts pile high. The storm began to pass sometime before dawn. It left the world glazed and glowing, silver under moonlight, quiet in a way that felt earned. By morning the snow was gold in the sun. Not bright, not brash, just soft, like old pages or new honey. The trees stood still under its weight, and the house creaked not in protest, but in memory. Clay woke to the smell of toast. He padded quietly down the stairs and paused by the kitchen. No, it was there. He found them outside. Lena wore one of his old coats, far too big, sleeves cuffed 3 times. Junie had her hands deep in birdseed, scattering it like confetti into the yard, laughing as chickadees flitted from tree to tree. Lena knelt beside her, smiling, arm braced around Junie's shoulders to block the wind. Clay stood in the doorway. For a long time, one hand resting on the frame beside the faint pencil marks, Junie's growth chart, and just below, almost hidden, Lena's quiet little notch. The snow was already starting to melt in patches where the sun hit. Still, the fire hadn't gone out. In a quiet house by a frozen road, a man, a girl, and a lost bride became something like a family. Not by promise, not by blood, but by choosing each other in the silence. There were no declarations, no grand sweeping speeches, just quiet gestures, a scarf left on a chair, tea poured without a word, a height mark etched beside another on a worn wooden frame. Junie never asked why Lena had arrived barefoot and bruised. She only showed her the crayons and drew her into the world the way children do, with pure, unquestioning acceptance. Clay didn't ask for stories. He offered space. A blanket folded, a fire kept going, a drawer left open long enough for someone to place something inside if they ever chose to. And Lena, she stayed. She stayed through snow and thaw, through days that hummed with new rhythms. She stayed through the quiet healing that only time and gentleness can give. The ghosts in her eyes softened, though they never fully left. Some things don't. But she hummed more now, laughed more now. She stood a little taller in her borrowed coat. No one came looking. No letters arrived. The past remained where it belonged, burnt at the edges, hidden in drawers, fading into memory. There would be other winters, other storms. But for now, in that small house with creaky floors and firelit walls, 3 people who should never have found each other, did, and they stayed. If this story touched you, subscribe or share where you're watching from. These stories matter. They remind us that family isn't always found. Sometimes it's quietly made.